Hey there, Fellowship family. You are listening to a channel created for the church in Winchester and beyond with the purpose to encourage, inspire, and equip you to love God and love others more fully. I'm your host, Caleb Pearson. Joining me at the round table, Aaron Shiffler. Hey, Aaron. How you doing, buddy?
I'm fine, Caleb. How are you, man?
Good. So good to see you.
You as well, man.
Thank you for doing this. We both just commuted from West Virginia.
Yes, indeed we did. All the way in the great state of West Virginia.
That's super good. You're a teacher up there. We'll get into that a little bit, I'm sure, but I just finished up some AvaCare stuff, so super cool. This is my first time on the Fellowship Family Podcast as well as you, so it's exciting to hear a little bit of your stories. So, Aaron, I wanted to start off just by, I like to get people's FBC story, put it in the context of the church, what it's been like for us to experience this body of believers in this town. So I'd love to just hear a little bit about who you are, where you grew up, what you do, and how you came to know Christ, and what your experience has been like at Fellowship.
Yeah, man. Yeah, so my name is Aaron Shiffler. Many people in FBC know me because I was kind of born and raised in the church. Really, ever since I can remember, from the time I was very, very young, attended FBC, grew up here in Winchester. Other than my time that I went to college down in Richmond, Virginia, really I've lived in Winchester pretty much my whole life. As far as what I do, I'm actually a teacher. I teach in Berkeley County, West Virginia, hence the travel time here today. And I actually teach at Martinsburg High School is where I teach. So I am right in the middle of the kids that are, having a hard time there. And it's definitely very rewarding for me to be there. So, it's a day. Every day is a day when you're a teacher, especially teaching high school math and science. But, it's good. It's good. I enjoy it. And,
yeah, that's awesome. So how old were you when you came here? Born into the church or very young?
I was not born into the church.
Do you remember? Okay.
If I'm not mistaken, my parents attended First Christian Church over near the hospital in Winchester when I was a tiny baby. Yeah. And then they switched green roof,
Pre-green roof.
Pre-green roof.
Interesting.
Yes.
I've never heard it called that before.
Yes, pre-green roof. That's what I call it.
Roof.
And
we should make T-shirts.
Yeah, where
that's
the
funny.
office buildings are.
Right.
It's what it is now. That was where we had our church back in the day, man. I know you remember that.
There was a basketball court. The what is now the nursery was the sanctuary.
Indeed.
So that's super cool. Yeah, shout out to Kathy Shiffler. Thanks for doing big things with your family. It's been awesome, Aaron, to see you in Keystone, the young adults group lately. And I grew up with your younger brother, Logan. So I remember what it was like to grow up with him and get kind of connected with you a little bit. Aaron, as you know, the church has been kind of embarking on this identity and sexuality focus. We devote intentional time, sometimes from the pulpit, sometimes from just the home center and different resources and classes to address a topic. And so this topic has been two things. One, particularly sensitive, but also particularly impactful for people to talk about because it's super relevant for people that are maybe struggling with it personally, but also just the way they interact with other people regarding their identity and whether or not it's in Christ, and then also their sexuality as well. Tell us a little bit about what has happened in your life over the last few years that might tie into that focus, that idea of sexuality and the gospel.
Okay, yeah, and to preface, I have a lot of respect for our church that they are willing, and they feel like God has called them to tackle this issue because it is a very controversial issue. As a teacher, I deal with it every day in my classroom.
Sure.
So much respect. Thank you, FBC elders and pastoral staff, because I know it's not an easy topic to touch on, that's for sure. And as far as what's going on in my life in the past few years, I've had a run of it. I've had a run of it in the last few years. Definitely had a lot of ups. Definitely had a lot of downs. Really, got to kind of figure out how to condense this into
I know.
something because it's a lot of unpacking that could be done. With regard to my identity and sexuality, kind of referencing back to attending FBC my whole life. I was born and raised in a Christian home by my mom and dad. And I attended FBC, but while I was growing up, I definitely always kind of identified myself, and even in school, when I was in grade school, K through 12, I set myself aside as someone who was a Christian. And while outwardly, I was very actively feeling like I was living that life. Inwardly, I definitely had some stuff going on in my life that was not Christ-like. And it's one of those things where, you fake it till you make it type deals. And, it eventually all caught up with me, is probably the best way to put that. Definitely one thing that I particularly struggled with, and I know that this is something that either has been or will be addressed in the focus with the sexuality portion is pornography. It is a word that everybody doesn't like to talk about. It is a word that people don't like to hear. But I know you and I have previously had conversation that it is most definitely something that should be talked about.
Sure.
And it is something that really, from the time I was actually in 7th grade when that whole pornography addiction started for me. And it sucked me in just like they design it to is get kids hooked young, and then they can, fuel their industry off of that addiction. Serious stuff. And it had severe, almost snowball-like effect, detrimental effects throughout my life, really culminating in the termination of a marriage is what ended up culminating for me. And that was, the details around that were certainly not good. But my previous wife did decide that, she was better off without me. And, the pornography was a big part of that. I also had an additional addiction to video games. And that's kind of more on the identity side. My identity was not rooted in Christ. It was most definitely rooted in material things, and video games was one of my number one priorities on my list for the majority of my life. I know my mother would testify to that. My parents tried all kinds of interventions growing up by limiting my gameplay time, grounding me from it and taking it away, and nothing really ever worked. I was always craving more, and I didn't see it in that moment. Growing up when I was a kid, I didn't see that was where my identity was rooted. But that really, for me, I think that is why I have come to the point where I have had to pretty much quit it, because it was my identity, and as we all know, having your identity rooted in material things, that's not biblical, and it's not a recipe for success as far as that goes. So
and I think it's cool. I mean, I remember when you almost re-entered into my life a year ago with the launch of Keystone, and talking with you, to hear you say a little bit of this again, and to think about our focus being identity and sexuality, and you going through one example of each of those things as far as an addiction, and what drew your attention, the identity with the gaming and material things, and then the warping of the sexuality with the pornography. I mean, I don't know if you recall, but I remember, like, God is going to use this story, Aaron. God is going.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's funny too, just because when my wife did choose to leave me, that was in the summer of 2018. So we're almost 2 years removed from that. And that was definitely by far one of the hardest things that I have ever had to go through. And I grew, both as a person and in my faith more, in that time. Literally, God changed my heart in a matter of days, after she decided to walk out of the relationship. And, I mean, I wrote my testimony, it was obviously my updated testimony. It was 3 days after. That's really how long it took for God to change my heart. And one of the things with my new heart posture was I really did pray that God could find a way to use this moment, and what I've been through, and even going forward, to be able to help other people. That's the radical change that I had with that heart posture. I was very much a selfish person that, I had plenty of issues, but God really, really worked on my heart really fast. And so that was hard to go through, but it was so, full of joy, and I moved in such a positive direction very quickly. It was pretty awesome.
So to speak a little bit towards that positive direction, what was it about pornography and video gaming that you felt like did it for you in the time that kept drawing you back to it? And then an additional question of what eventually about it made you realize you needed to pull away, almost the positive of the moment and then the negative overall?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think probably it'd be easiest and best to address those two separately.
Yeah, sure.
Let's start with video games. So for video games, for me, like I said, it was my identity was in that. That was me. I really pushed so many other things to the side in favor of attaining that next level, of getting that next rank, of getting that tactical nuke in Call of Duty, whatever it was, and it was just for me, it's just very. How do I want to say this? I'm trying to think.
Yeah.
How I want to say this. Ask me that question again. I want to make sure I'm headed in the direction I want to head.
No, absolutely. So, and you addressed video gaming. So what was it about it at the time that made it appealing or made it a more welcoming attraction and temptation for you?
Absolutely, yeah. For me, I use video games big time as a stress reliever for me. But in a way for me, it was almost a cop-out stress reliever.
Okay.
Because it's easy to get on video games and have some fun and just do your thing if you're, I guess we could call it in quotes, a normal person. For me, as you know, I'm very competitive. So when I'm winning, absolutely, I am having the time of my life. When I am losing, it usually added more stress than not. So that attachment to being able to kind of almost disconnect really as well was kind of another thing. I could put my earphones on. I was very avid about having those over earphones, and it would block the world out. And I almost, my parents used the phrase when I was growing up, I lived in a fantasy world, and they were right, because I was able to just kind of have it as an escape from reality, an escape from life, so that I could just be in what my identity was in my little environment, which was my earphones and my controller, keyboard and mouse, what have you. And that for me, I think it was less about like winning or losing, and like at the core of that, it was an escape. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, totally. So to borrow that language of the idea of a stress reliever and an escape, would it be similar with pornography for you at the time, looking back at it, or would it be a different reason? Because I've talked to people about gaming and pornography, and there's a variety of reasons people will flock to something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is absolutely a reason that translates to pornography, but the reason why I wanted to separate the two, because pornography for me had an additional thing. As I did say, I was married. I was actually married for almost 4 years, and we were high school sweethearts. I mean, we came through high school together, and we're together for almost a total of 10 years. We almost made it to 10 years together. And while that video games, they also provided that escape, pornography does do that. It gives you that escape. It gives you that stress relief, that flood of, I'm also, I'm a biology major. We're biology majors here. It gives you that flood of dopamine, and the dopamine is that chemical in your brain that deals with happiness, and it gives you that immediate flood, very very similar to opioids and drugs, and that's really scary to think about, that you're getting a similar neurological reaction to pornography as you are cocaine or heroin or something like that. That's sobering, and when I heard that statistic and cross-referenced it with my biology major, I was like, that kind of makes sense and is a little scary. So it really, chemically speaking, it's an addiction. It really is. And the additional thing that pornography has that video games does not is pornography enables you to get that feeling that God designed to be felt in a biblical marriage, between a husband and a wife, where they are promoting intimacy and they are going out of their way and they are investing in each other, and you don't have to do any of that with pornography. It's
Right.
free, it's accessible, it's available, and it's not relational. It requires no effort. And that is that additional piece for me personally, is I could get what I needed, if you want to kind of put it roughly, and I didn't have to put in any effort because it's not relational.
Yeah, that's huge. And I've heard your story before. We've had the opportunity to fellowship and talk about it. And one thing I've loved is your frame of reference for all of it. Well, we've already mentioned it, knowing God's going to use it for good, but also you realizing where you fell and where your downfall was too. Your ability to go under the hood biblically on yourself in this situation. I would imagine it's easy to be angry, be bitter in a situation of look at what has been done to me. But it just personally for me, it's been admirable to see you realize I needed to work on things. And so to address that idea, how do you think your devotion to those activities prevented you from learning to become the kind of husband and man God wanted you to be? So specifically to pivot into your spiritual life, what was that like for you?
I mean, to address like the first part of what you said, a very reliable elder here at the church, one of the things that they said to me, and they were a little bit involved in kind of helping me through everything. Their phrase was pride comes before the fall. And he is so spot on with that, because pride is another Christ-like characteristic that we as humans display, particularly men, in my opinion. We can be pretty darn prideful, and you can't grow, from the inside out if there's pride in there blocking the way. It just
Right.
doesn't work. And so for me, I was way more prideful than I realized, almost. Where I had that mentality of, I have this under control. This is not an issue. My pornography addiction, no one knows about it. And as we know and can see, it spun out of control for me worse than I could have ever even hoped and even dreamed of. So it is an issue, and I see it. I teach in a high school classroom. I deal with high school boys. I deal with the star-studded football players from Martinsburg High School who have won the last 6 out of 7 state championships. They
have it all lined up for them.
Exactly. They have it all lined up for them. They expect to win. And, everybody, I see the pride in that classroom every day. These kids are just so arrogantly prideful and are not willing to even admit that they're wrong. And it's so hard to, be able to change yourself or even help someone else change when they exhibit that type of pride and behavior, So to address that, and then also to kind of, bring the rest of that home, how did it, these activities, the pornography addiction, the gaming addiction, how did that prevent me from becoming the kind of husband that God wanted me to be? I mean, obviously, if I was the husband that I was meant to be and the man that I was meant to be, I probably would not be sitting here divorced, So there was a lot of change that had to happen, and definitely for me, because I could isolate myself in my own little fantasy world from gaming, and then I could also get what I needed on the sexuality side from pornography very easily. I didn't put any effort into my marriage. I really did. I barely did enough to get by, if we're being completely honest. Like I barely even met that standard. Like I wasn't even at like a 50 percentile is, the average effort that a guy puts in. I was probably at like 25, just barely squeaking by. And why would I need to do that when, I kind of had everything that I needed? I had my, escape where I could de-stress with video games. I had my, sexuality side where I could get my fix and do what I needed to do to not have to worry about that. And, it even caused a completely backwards dynamic. It was biblically backwards, where my wife was the one that was wearing the pants of the relationship, and she was the one making all the executive decisions. She was the one that was leading. She was always, trying to get me to do things, and she was the one putting in 110% to compensate for my lack of effort. And really what happened is she got burned out and then ended up making some pretty sinful choices. And I certainly don't want to, paint her in a bad light, because I shared more than, I would argue more than 50% of the blame,
Sure.
but really it probably falls 50-50.
Well, and it would be the same paintbrush for all of us
exactly.
if we were to do that.
And I'm not the only one that's been through things like this, so it's not exclusive to me.
Well, and that's what's huge about it, Aaron. And I think about the future, not just for you, but for the people of our church and the young men and women as well. This Fellowship Family podcast, I mean, it's new. All our podcasts are new. This one is the newest one. I was excited to hear that we would be doing this with you, because it's an opportunity for the younger people to see, what I'm exposed to, what I'm dealing with. There is somebody ahead of me on this journey and in that path. So what has the Lord done for you in the last 2 to 3 years that motivates you to give advice to high school or early 20s guys and girls? I mean, at this point, what have you learned that you would love other people to learn that might be behind you in life?
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's the whole point of why we're sitting here.
Yeah.
Is to really make it so that other people can hopefully learn from my mistakes, and not have to go through some of the things that I did go through. Because I can tell you, I do not wish what I went through on my worst enemy. I really don't. And I had it was my aunt actually. She is an aunt on my mom's side. She actually kind of had told my mom, and then my mother relayed the message to me that divorce is, in many ways, it's worse than death. It's actually worse than death, because with death you have the closure of this person is gone. They're now gone to heaven, what have you. Whereas with divorce, that person is, that you were in a covenant relationship with until death do you part. They're still walking around down here on earth, and you have to essentially live with your failure, and even stand the chance of having a physical embodiment of that failure walking around. And it's really hard, to do that, especially if you don't get a lot of closure in the ending of the relationship, which that was definitely something that was lacking for me. So please, those of you watching and listening, please learn from my mistakes, because I do not want you to have to go through anything like what I went through. Now, on the flip side of that, that kind of was the knock on the head that I needed, for God to really kind of get me out of my fog of where I was, and really turn my heart. And like I had said earlier, God really, turned my heart really fast at the beginning, really fast, within like a week. I mean, I had a complete heart posture change, and I just was so, intent on becoming a better person. I even made efforts to try to save the marriage in the beginning, and due to many various details, that ended up not working out, which was unfortunate. But things do happen for a reason, and God does have a plan. So even when you go through some serious life-altering, difficult things, like, we get to take comfort in the fact that God is working all the time. That new Michael W. Smith song, it's Waymaker. Yeah, I love that song. Listen to it on the way here. Yeah. Super solid song. So, that's the first and foremost is listen to the advice that I'm attempting to give. As far as pornography, let's hit the home run first. That's the big one. And, it's one thing that needs to be addressed. It needs to be talked about. So if you're, high school age, 20-something age guy, or even a female, that is struggling with a pornography addiction, or you're even struggling with pornography, period. You may feel that you're not addicted. Usually if you have to ask yourself, am I addicted to this? You probably are, whether you know it or not. Yeah. Hang on.
Yeah, you're good.
Excuse me. Sorry, getting over being sick. But, pornography cannot be dealt with behind the darkness of closed doors. That is the be all end all, the bottom line. If you try to deal with it behind the darkness of closed doors, I can guarantee you will not be successful. Pornography is handled most effectively in community. Granted, that community should probably be a select few small, very well-trusted people. And the biggest weapon against pornography is accountability. So I would encourage you to reach out to close family members, reach out to best friends, reach out to the church. There are most certainly resources here at Fellowship Bible Church that are available, that you could get the help that you need, for sure. That I know for a fact. So that is super important, and you kind of have to. It's almost like, cut the head off of the snake type analogy. And, the unfortunate thing is it would be nice in an ideal world that we could cut the head off the snake and be done with it. But as we know, we got to be careful picking that head back up because it will keep biting you. And it's something that it's a war. You win a battle, but then you got to keep fighting.
Right.
And so that's why it is so important to be in community and have accountability partners, because it's not something that just you snap your fingers and it's fixed. It's a struggle. It's living in sin, and that is a battle that we all fight. Living in the flesh. Eventually, we're not going to have to fight that battle anymore. Right. Praise God. But that is my absolute best advice for the pornography. On the side of the video games, that's a tough one because, it really doesn't matter whether you're a Christian or not. I would argue that a majority in our society probably views pornography in at least a somewhat negative light. Video games, on the other hand, whole different animal. Yeah. They are now, broadcasting professionally played video games on ESPN. So it is something that is increasingly being implemented into our society. And that's where that pitfall can happen. And I actually use that as a justification, to kind of justify my use and participation in video games, is everybody does it. It's fine. It's normal, it's fun. It's not hurting anybody. And, to that point, there are many, many people that can participate in video games and just, play a little bit before they go to bed, or, just play in the afternoon when they're at home in between college classes, what have you. I am not one of those people. For me, it was something that when I was spending time with the people that I loved, in my mind, I'm thinking, gosh, when is this going to be over? I want to go play video games. And for me, that unhealthy level of not being able to regulate it was a huge issue. So you really have to, with the video games, you have to be able to self-evaluate, take off the pride, filter, take off the, oh, this isn't an issue filter. You really have to kind of evaluate, where are you at? Where is your heart at? How invested is it in video games? Are these video games affecting my relationships? And for me, they very much were,
Yeah. Well, it speaks to that idea of too much of anything can be a bad thing, right?
Oh, yeah.
You have a secret sin, an inherently secret sin of pornography behind closed doors, lights off. And then you have a video games, doors open, lights on, this is what we do. And there also happens to be a community of gamers. So it's a different animal, but it's the same process that sin can creep in. I mean, I just had somebody in the youth reach out to me and say, hey, I'm in a community of gamers and they don't know the Lord. I want to show them the Lord. How do I do that? And so it was cool to talk with this guy about how you can bring God into those moments, but also be careful not to dive too deep into them. There's a difference between catering to the world for their sake and then finding yourself just completely drowning.
Absolutely.
In a culture of that.
Yeah. And all things in moderation.
Right.
Like you said, too much of anything, it most definitely can be a bad thing. We're made, back to our biology major, we're made of 70% water, but if you
too much water, you're dead.
Too much water and you die. You heard that one news report years ago. That was something else, let me tell you.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome, man. So let's wrap this all up. We just talked about at the beginning of the podcast, pushing 2 years out of this huge change in your life, looking at yourself spiritually before all of this happened, and comparing that to where you are spiritually now. What would be a take-home message, not just of that's what I got out of it as far as my relationship with Christ, but also an encouragement for other listeners as well?
I mean, as far as like where I am in my faith walk, and where I'm at spiritually, after everything happened and I really kind of started to pick up the broken pieces and put them back together. One of the goals that I set for myself, and what I continually prayed over and over again for really still, it's almost 2 years now. I still pray this just about every night, that number one, that God use my hardships to be able to help other people. I really had that transformation. I've always been a naturally selfish person, and so being selfless has become a much, much bigger priority for me. And it's been tough because it kind of goes against my nature. I'm naturally a selfish person. I think even like I'm an excessively selfish person. Like, I know that's a character trait of the flesh, but like, in my opinion, I am a naturally very selfish person. So it's a battle for me, and I prayed that it would help. And then I also prayed that, I can continue to, just pursue Christ-likeness, and maintain in the forefront of my mind, as I've heard you say it, and I love how you say this, we attain sanctification, by the justification in what Jesus did on the cross for us. And I think that, when you unpack that, in Keystone actually is where you unpack that for me, way early on. And it was a kind of a perspective changer for me, where, I am now, focused on living my life for other people so much more than I am myself.
Right. That idea of selfish works to attain salvation, instead of just realizing I'm a changed person. I can do this in the freedom of Christ.
Absolutely, man. Yeah. And so that perspective change for me, just has really transformed my life. And I've found joy in places that I never really thought possible, almost.
That's good.
I never thought that unloading the dishwasher for my mom without being asked would be a source of joy for me, but it is. And like I said, it's a battle, but it's definitely, having that new perspective, was probably my biggest gain from that, the work that God did in my life, and being able to continue to even now to continue growing. I've spent a lot of time in the Word. Between devotionals, I listen to a lot of various podcasts, FBC podcasts, and some other different churches, because I drive up to Martinsburg and back every day. So, that's what I do on my commute time. And it's been really good. My biblical knowledge has improved a lot. Probably I've gained more biblical knowledge in the last 2 years than I had from ages 1 to 26. So yeah, pretty crazy. But, it's a journey, it's a journey. And my word of encouragement to those of you watching or listening, it would be, embark on that journey. Don't be afraid, to pursue that. And you will, when you get that perspective change, you will start to find joy in places that you really never expect. And, almost like if you're someone who's struggling, there is light at the end of the tunnel. And, sometimes God might see fit to put a light in the tunnel for you to help you see a little bit along the way. And, that definitely happened with me.
That's awesome, man. Well, thank you so much, dude, for being honest and vulnerable with that stuff.
Yeah, no,
it's huge.
Yeah, it is. It's and I know there's so many people out there that they eyeballs kind of roll back in their head, like, how in the world is he talking about this stuff? But like, this is the perspective change that I'm talking about. This is I have just been, God broke me down. He used what I went through to break me down into these teeny little pieces, and I just was the most miserable human being ever. An
established Christian going through it.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying, is like, I was born and raised in a Christian home. Like, this isn't supposed to happen, in quotes, to Christians. Right. It's not supposed to happen to us, but it did to me. And so it has just given me that level of perspective that I can be open and vulnerable, and I know that, if people are going to judge me, that's on them, not on me. And I know that I'm rooted with my identity in Christ, so I can be vulnerable because God's got me. It's fine,
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for being here, dude.
Absolutely.
That's super cool.
Yeah.
Just a reminder to our listeners, you guys can find all our podcasts up on the Fellowship Bible Church YouTube channel. Again, fbcva.life/identity. The focus that we're doing, it'll be wrapping up in a month or two. I think we're about halfway through. But again, so many different resources, so many different opportunities for people of any age to find that community that you talked about, find that accountability and help other people shed Christ's light, on what he's been doing. So thank you very much for listening. Until next time, much love and God bless.